Good morning, people. All right, so in this training session, what we're going to do is we're going to basically look at how we can integrate bespoke shipping courier into Linux.net. So basically what we've done now is we have created a system by which we can inject shipping integrations directly into Linux.net so that it looks and feels pretty much exactly the same as an integration that is natively developed for Linux.net. So first of all, let's go and actually have a look what we're trying to achieve at the end of it. So I'm going to go ahead and log into Linux.net. Okay, let's make sure I'm actually in my own system. I am. So if we jump into shipping integrations, so this is all our current shipping integrations we currently have in Linux.net. So we integrated them into Linux.net. So when we right-click on the order, print shipping label, we actually get the shipping label being sent to the virtual printer or being embedded into the invoice and so on. So what we want to do is we want to effectively develop our own courier integration and effectively inject it into Linux.net so that customers would integrate it pretty much exactly the same as they would do with the native integrations that we have developed. So normally the customer would go through this following process. Let's just follow through this process, and then what we're going to be doing is we're going to be replicating this process when we develop our own integration. Okay, so the customer clicks Add Integration, and effectively they're being presented with all the different couriers that we currently have integrated into the system. And as you can see at the bottom of it, we have two new integrations that normally don't appear on a normal system. Called Snickers Direct. It's something I've created myself for the purposes of this demo, and the parcel station as well. So what we can see that there's a difference between the native application, native integrations, and the integrations that have been basically bespokely created for Linux.net in a way that the developer is actually stating the system, whereas developer for the actual integration, custom integration, states the name of the developer. We also have the documentation link, which leads to a developer website. In our case, it's Snickers. Version of the application, it states the fact that it's external application and it can have pricing. So effectively, external developers can create shipping integrations and basically charge money for our customers using them. So in our case, this application is free. So effectively, when I integrate it, it's not going to ask me for any payment details or anything like that. But we can have it so that while you integrate it, the first thing it will ask, it will tell you the fact that it costs so much. You can have different plans, and then the customer will have to choose the plan before they proceed to actually install and integrate in this courier. Okay, so the customer would click Integrate, then they would enter arbitrary account name for this integration. Each signal integration has to have a so-called account name by which the customer can then identify this integration in their system. So I'm going to just put test star 1. Okay, and the next step, when it's external shipping integration, it basically tells the user the fact that it's external. It asks them to basically agree to terms and conditions of this external application, because we as Linux systems don't support external courier integrations. So we kind of need to tell that to the customer, and the customer has to acknowledge the fact that it is something external, and all the support has to go to that external source. Okay. So the next step is basically when a user integrates a courier, they have to go through so-called wizard. That wizard consists of multiple steps, and the steps that the user takes can depend on the values that they've entered. For example, on Royal Mail integration, we ask the customer, do you have the Royal Mail OBA account? And if they say no, we'll take them to a different place in that, well, to different wizards that say that you have to go and acquire your OBA account and make sure you have the logins and all this kind of stuff. If they do have it, then we ask them to enter account number, and then we check this account number if we already have credentials for this account number. We just integrate it straight away, things like that. So we can create a very diverse workflow. The same applicable to external integrations. So the developer of the external query integration can define what those steps in the wizard will be. So in my case, I've just basically created 3 steps in the wizard. First of all is basically enter your contact details. Let's put something in there. It's something like this. Wet Sussex. Joke. Anybody gets it? Hey. Okay. And there's a question there at the end, what next stage do you want to go to? And then the customer can just choose, I want to go to a value stage or description stage, whatever. So I'm just going to say value stage. Ask me some more questions here. For example, I can validate his entry. So in my case, I've actually designed the external integration so that it checks the sum init value and has to be more than 10. And if it's not, it will throw an error message. So I'm just going to put 11 in there. And this is the third stage. Well, yeah, basically the third stage of the wizard. Just some other random config parameters of my integration that I have to put in there. Once it's all completed, the integration gets added into my system, basically. By the same token, for example, if I go back again, I forgot to mention this, put some random account number, repeat that. Okay, and imagine I abandoned the integration wizard at any given step. So for example, at this step, I just say cancel. The integration still gets added, but the status of this integration is input required. So it means that I haven't actually completed all the steps yet. So I can then come back to it at any point in time. Complete this step, I can then cancel it, abandon it, or for example, my workflow for integrating a courier can, for example, ask me, do you have an account with Snickers Direct? The customer says, no, but I really want to ship with Snickers Direct. Then we can ask them, put your phone number, put your email address, and the contact details, and then we can automatically set this stage into a waiting vendor, for example, and send ourselves an email saying this customer requested a new account with Snickers Direct. The Snickers Direct sales team can then contact this customer, and once they set up his account, they can go into this courier integration system because they effectively wrote it, and they can activate this customer profile straight away. When the customer goes back into the screen, they can see that the integration is already ready. So we can effectively control this workflow of the integration externally or internally. So we can put this wizard in like a pending stage, and we're waiting some confirmation from the vendor for your API keys or things like that. Okay. All right. So the customer integrated Snickers Direct. And the next step, what they do is they can go into configuration, and the configuration is just a set of settings that they can change. Some of the settings we might say you can't change, and as you can see during the wizard, I was entering a lot more information than I'm displaying right now. That's because I've chosen to hide this information. For example, if we ask a customer to enter their API keys or their passwords or things like that, so we might not want to display it in the config screen. We might want to create like a different wizard from the configuration that asks them to re-enter those things. Okay. Also, we might not want to we might not want to show some of the internal configuration parameters. So we can choose what we're going to show them. We can choose what would be in the read-only mode, and so on. Also, an integration, as you may know, can have so-called properties. This is something that will map the properties that are expected by the courier integration. So, for example, for each item, I'm expecting extended cover flag to be defined. So, for example, if I'm sending something expensive, in my integration, I can flag an item as being very expensive, so I need to automatically generate some kind of extended insurance cover. So how do we tell external integration those properties? Well, we use this so-called mapping. So we can say this external extended cover flag will map to extended property of an item called extended cover. So effectively, every time we generate a consignment, we just look at the item, order item, look at these extended properties, and then we take this value for extended cover and send it to external integration. The same we can do for order extended properties. So for example, in our case, our courier needs like a string, so say save place node. And this is something that will come up on the label. For example, where they can tell the delivery man to leave the package elsewhere if the customer is not available to take it. So I'm going to map it to order extended property save place. Okay, we'll do that. Then we have services. So the way it works, I'm sure you know. So we've got Linworks services. This is something defined in Linworks, and we map those services to external integrations. So when we click on, well, in the integration itself, when we click on services, the first thing we do is we request what services are available for this user to use with this integration. And then we display them in there. So the customer will choose one of the services, we'll add that. They can see some internal, some kind of indication for the services. They will normally see a code. Pretty much every single courier would have like a courier code, service code. We can split them into groups. For example, some aggregators like Parcel Station or NetDispatch, they would have multiple couriers available under their integration, and that would be effectively a group. So Hermes would be a group, DPD would be a group inside that. Okay, so the customer would add this, and then they would give it a name as they know it in Linworks. So for example, we'll put something like next day. Okay. Next day delivery, for example. So I'm defining this service as I know it in Linworks. Each one of those services can have its own configuration. So the customer can say, okay, when I'm using this service, I want to send to external integration this value. So for example, insurance cover. So everything that I'm printing using this service will be covered for up to 1,000 of something pounds, I suggest, suppose. Okay, so every time we print a label, we create a consignment. If it's assigned to next day delivery, we will find the fact that it's actually it's allocated to a Snickers Direct shipping courier for this fast to door next day delivery service, and the configuration item that we send with this consignment will be for insurance cover up to 1,000. Okay, so we do this. All right, so we added one service. So next thing, the customer is to go and print the shipping label. So how do we print the shipping label? Let's go and create an order. Add a product. Phone. It's paid, and I'm going to go and select shipping service, the one that I've just created, next day delivery. Okay, and the customer simply, selects an order and print shipping label into PDF or a virtual printer directly. And there you go, we've got a label. So this label, actually I've generated myself using my external integration. And this could be something that I drew from that external integration myself, something that I pulled from my courier API that I'm integrating. So in that case, this integration that I'm creating effectively becomes like a proxy, like a middleware that receives the data from Linworks in one format, translates it into something that the courier API can understand, gets the label out of that, and transfers it back into Linworks.net. Okay. So once the label is printed, we kind of require every single customer to file a shipping manifest every 24 hours. Okay. So we manage in all this manifestation as well within the system. So, and the shipping manifests, the customer at the end of the day, once they shipped all of the items, all of the consignments per day, imagine the driver turns up and says, give me the collection manifest, and the customer would have to go and file the manifest. Okay. In this, for every single manifest, well, the system kind of records every single consignment that we are printing, can record every single property of this consignment internally. All the packages, all the weight information, everything is kind of retained in the system. So once the customer printed the end of day manifest, they can print a courier specific collection manifest, right? So in my case, I just output the word manifest in there. So this is something courier specific, or they can just print a generic one from Linux.net itself. It just lists all the consignments. Of course, they can modify this themselves. But for example, the courier, after the end of day, they need pre-advice to be uploaded to their system, like saying that this customer is going to be sending all of these items, and the van number such and such will be picking them up. So it transfers all of this data into the courier system, and then the courier system will then produce collection manifest, maybe a sales order for this collection, things like that. So it can all be incorporated into this courier specific manifest. And that's about it, really. So this is the whole workflow that we kind of have to replicate, well, not replicate, but we have to develop for in our external user integration. Looks like a lot of things, right? But in fact, it's not. We only really have to care about configuration screen, okay, what this looks like. In fact, it's not only what it looks like, we just have to feed the data into Linux.net. See, this is the stages of the configuration, and this is the values that the customer needs to enter. We have to provide the list of services for a specific customer, okay? And the other one is how to get a label. So effectively, the drawing of the label or retrieval of this label from the courier API. That's all the things that we need to do. I mean, that's all. We don't need to do anything else. It's actually pretty simple. I mean, very simple. We don't have to worry about storing the consignments. We don't have to worry about, printing them into a printer or anything like that. Everything else is handled by Linux.net. Okay. So let's go ahead and first of all delete this integration. I don't want to see it in my system. Okay. So first of all, let's go ahead and try to remember what I was supposed to be doing. Okay. So I've got the GitHub template solution already kind of ready for us to use. It's a .NET 4.5 .NET solution built on MVC. It's built on MVC only for the purposes of having the web API controller in it. So basically, what we need to do to create the external courier integrations, we need to create a web service that will be able to accept the requests in a specific format that Linux.net sends, process them, and respond in a specific way that Linux.net expects. That's it. And we effectively need to create 4 endpoints as a requirement. And those endpoints give me a configuration stage, save the configuration stage, generate a label, and cancel the label, basically. Okay? And we already have a kind of a template solution that you could just take and modify, and effectively you can create an integration with the courier within about a couple of hours. So let's go through this process, actually download the template solution and modify it a little bit, and just to see how Linux.net sends the data, what it sends, how we process it, and what we actually respond with. Okay, So I'm going to go and download this source code. Maybe it work. No. Just getting started in there. So in our source code, we actually have the documentation that kind of describes pretty much the concept, what I've just been through, how the customer would integrate it, what they would do to add services, and how they would print the label, all this kind of stuff. So we'll then go into the realm of how it actually works from the Linux.net perspective. I have a nice flowchart diagram that effectively explains that when Linux, let's just zoom that in a little bit. Okay, so when a customer adds a new integration, what sort of endpoints we use, and what those endpoints respond to, and then what follows next. Okay, but we'll go through this basically in a little bit more details during this training, during this session. Okay, so I've got my template solution, and what do I need to do next? Okay, so basically Linux.net needs to connect to so-called endpoints, right? What we can do when we develop an integration, we can create a whole solution, then deploy it on a website, then tell Linux.net that this is the endpoints, and Linux.net will be able to communicate to those endpoints. However, you lose an ability to debug it. Yeah, right? So what we want to do is we want to effectively tell Linux.net to connect directly to my computer so all the endpoints, Linux.net will be sent to this computer, so I can trap them and set a breakpoint, and in my code I can actually debug it. Do you understand what I mean by that? Okay, so right, I've downloaded the source code. Let's go and start up Visual Studio. But I start this in admin mode. I'm going to start this up in the admin mode because that's important if you use local IIS instead of Express IIS. We will need to use local IIS because Linux.net will be sending the requests to my IP address of this computer to a specific port. And IIS, basically this computer will be acting as a server effectively. So Linux.net will be sending by IP address all the requests directly to the computer, and I want to, IIS to trap them, and so that I can debug it. Okay, so let's go and just start up that solution. Trustworthy? No, I don't think so. Okay, so that's a solution. We're going to go through its structure and how it's structured. So this is basically our starting project. We're going to go through it in a minute. All I want to do straight away is I want to make sure that it actually compiles and runs. And of course, we've got this, I'm sorry to say, it's bullshit, NuGet, that we need to sort out first. So right-click on the solution and hit restore, cross your fingers, and hope that it will actually work. It did something, we never know what NuGet does, so we just hope that it does work. And it does work. As you can see, all the exclamation mark disappeared from the references, so it must have done something right. I pre-configured this solution so that effectively it should just run the NuGet packages without errors, hopefully, and it will only work in 2015. Okay, So then I'm going to go ahead and make sure that we're going to run it in IS Express first, because all I want to do is just want to make sure that it actually works. So I'm just going to start that up. So we do some silly things like loading symbols from somewhere. Yeah, I think I've got some like test ASPX page that should say hello world if it all works fine. Yay. Okay. So that's that. So at the moment, we run our solution in IS Express. That's not very useful because Linux.net cannot communicate with that. IS Express is something that runs within your context of your own system. What we need to do, effectively, we need to expose this solution as a web service on the whole internet so that Linux.net can actually talk to it. Well, let's go ahead and first of all, into firewall and turn it off. Next, into IIS. Right, I'm going to go ahead and create a new site. Call it ship. What you thought. And I'm going to give it a location of the website of our solution. Right? Just this is where Linux.net. I mean, when we build our solution, this is where it's going to compile, and we're just going to map it to the whole site to that directory. So effectively, that is actually active site. And not to sort of interfere with anything, we're going to assign a different port to it. So in my case, I'm just going to give it a port 56112. So if I just type an IP address on my computer, then put 56112 from, let's say, somewhere else, from a mobile phone, I should be able to get to this website. Of course, providing that you routed the data on your router to this computer as well. Sorry, I borrowed a paper. Okay, so provided that you've routed this on your router, all the traffic should come through our local IIS. Okay, so that's the site. It's running on port 56112, and I should be able to access it. So for the purposes of the demo, we don't want to expose our office's IP address. So what I've done is actually I've actually mapped a DNS address of shipdev@linapp.com to the IP address of our office, and that on a specific port 56112, I configured our router to route the traffic to my computer. Okay, so if I do this, then shipdev 56112, this is the port number in test ASPX, to our solution web, and we need to basically change it from IS Express to use a local IS, right? I'm just going to set this local IS, make sure it's actually going to be running on that port that we have defined, 56112. And now if I run this solution, it will effectively use local IS, and any external requests to this site, basically, to this web server, should go through the normal debugging process. Okay, so I'm going to set the breakpoint in my load SPX, and now that I've mapped shipdev.linapp.com in a DNS to route all the traffic to my IP address, I can just basically try to reload this page, and it should hit my test ASPX page. Yeah, it does. There you go. So any requests that come from external sources, I can put a breakpoint in my code and I can debug it through. It's quite important when we're developing something. We don't want to constantly upload stuff to the website, well, to the web server, and test it in Linux side and not knowing what it's doing. It's much easier just to basically tell Linux to send the request directly to my IP address of this computer and debug it through in the code directly. And once it's ready, I can deploy it, change the manifest in Linux so that it knows where to look. All right, so now that we've got like our development environment ready, let's go and have a look at what the solution actually contains. What it does contain, it's a very, very simple structure. Just test the ASPX page, web config file. For the web config, we need some basic file storage. This is something where we're going to be storing sessions, authorization tokens, all this kind of stuff. Each application in Linux.net has got an ID and a secret. We have to sort of store them somewhere. And some stuff for logging files and logging exceptions. So all the configuration can go in there. The setting helper that allows us to extract these settings from the web config file. And then basically, because it's an MVC5 web API application, we've got a routing. The routing is very simple. Everything that goes after /API, then a controller name, and then the method name. That's all we need to do. And obviously, we restrict everything to a post. So everything that comes into this web API has to be a post request. And we have controllers. So this is the things that will handle all the requests. And we have a model classes. So effectively, creating model flavor request and response. And that's about it, really. Okay, so in our controllers, this is where we have our endpoints where Linux.net will be sending data to. It will be sending everything in a post as a request, basically, as an object. So, for example, in this case, in an add new user endpoint method, it will send a request object that will be deserialized from JSON into this object. So it expects a parameter email, Linux, unique identifier, and account name in it. Okay, we do have documentation for this kind of stuff. So every single endpoint is documented. For example, there, add new user endpoint, what object it requires, an example of this object, and what it responds with, and what it does as well. So all of it is kind of documented. So for example, if somebody's developing the PHP, all they need to do is they need to create each one of those endpoints and make sure that they can accept this request and respond with this structured response. And that's about it, basically. Okay, so all of the other files are just there to help us, to run, well, to basically to generate the label or to save the configuration file, all this kind of stuff. Okay, so I've got my solution. I can run it, and it sits somewhere on the net, and effectively Linux should be able to communicate with it. So our next step is to tell Linux where to send those requests, what sort of shipping integration it is, what's its name, the logo, all of this kind of stuff. So we do that by going to linux.net, logging in with our developer credentials, enter in the correct password into the applications. Okay, and first thing we need to do is to create a new application. So let's create a new app. I'm going to call it Mars Direct. And the type of the application will be shipping integration. Okay. So we created a new app called Mars Direct. Here's its application ID and application secret. Effectively, what I need to do is I need to go and copy them into my configuration file. This is app ID. And this is app secret. And when I edit it, skip the description to your application, and basically the most important bit of the whole thing is this one. This is called application manifest. This is where we define. This is how we tell Linworks what this extension for Linux.net actually is, and specify all its parameters. So in our case, we tell the fact that it's a shipping integration, and it has to contain all of those parameters. And those parameters are, let's go through them, vendor name. So this is how Linworks.net will uniquely identify your integration. So it has to be capitals, it has to be less than 16 characters long, I think, and has to basically have the name of the courier in it. So I'm going to put Mars Direct, something like that, in there. So this is pretty much, the user will never see this normally. Somewhere inside the system, when the shipping labels get printed, stuff like this, the courier name would be visible to them. It might appear in some reports, but generally what they're going to be able to see in the user interface is this thing. When vendor friendly name, then there is a logo that will be appearing on the shipping integration itself, and that has to be basically somewhere on the internet. Let's see if I actually have access to this. What? There you go. Okay, this is where we actually specify the endpoints. This is where Linworks.net will be sending the requests to. All right, so in our case, that will be something that is that Linworks.net can actually see. So this is going to be my ship dev URL. It might as well be your IP address. For example, if my IP address was 196.208.2.8.12, so I can just basically take this, and that will be the my endpoint URL, something like that, right? But in our case, our endpoint is ship dev, then the port name, and then API, then the controller name, and the name of the method. So this is where we're going to be sending the data to. When the customer adds a new integration, when the user config, when they basically trying to retrieve the user config, and so on. I'm just going to go ahead and change all my parameters to use this URL. Ping. Okay. And let's just save the application. That's it. Then, okay, so I've got my application manifest basically saved in development version. So if I go into Linworks.net now, okay, into settings, I don't know, shipping, integrations. Click on that. I don't see my Mars integration there yet. Simply because I haven't actually deployed it. What I need to do, because development version is something that we kind of dig around with it. And then once we're kind of ready, we have to actually create a new version of the application, right? Create a new version. And when, this is very important for the shipping integration, not as important for any other kind of extensions. Because what the system will do when you set it to, when you create a new version, it will validate every single one of those parameters. While you're in development version, it might not validate them, so you can put anything you want in there. But once you kind of put it live, then it will validate every single endpoint. It will make a copy of this URL. It will make sure that you're using a unique vendor name. If I put something like DPD in there, it will say, no, you can't use DPD. It's already reserved by some other integration, all this kind of stuff. So that's why it's important to actually set it to a new live version and set that new version to live. Okay, so now if I go into linworks.net, what I should be able to see when I click new add new integration is Mars Direct appearing in there. So it's got who developed it, the pricing plan. If I go and put the new the pricing plans in different currencies, it will display the right pricing plan for this application in here. Okay, so now another thing is, because I'm actually logged in as Fedor Demo, so this, and I'm also a developer, and I'm logged in as Fedor Demo. So the only customer who can, and the only user who can see this Mars Demo or Mars Direct integration is the developer themselves. So until this application is set to be public, nobody else can see it. So I can create my application, I can test it, I can see it in the system, I can interface with it. Linworks.net will be able to talk directly to my computer here, and all of this kind of stuff can happen completely independent from, from actually deploying the system live. This is very useful. So for example, if you deployed a new application, then told your user or your customer go and install it, they won't be able to see it. The only way they will be able to see it, unless until it's public, if they specifically go to the URL of the installation of the application and they install that app, only then they will be able to see in that list. All the other users don't see it. Okay. Right. So let's go ahead and actually see what happens on every single request. And we're actually going to go through that same process that I went through at the beginning of the session, where I follow the workflow of the user, what they do to integrate a courier, to print a shipping label, to file a manifest, and to cancel a label, for example. And we're going to go through every single step, and we're going to see exactly what we need to do from the code perspective to enable all of those things and how they work as well. Okay, so let's very, very quickly go and look at our diagram just to see what actually happens when a customer integrates a new courier. Okay, so when the customer integrates a new courier, so this is when they went and clicked add new integration, the very first thing after they accept the terms and conditions, the very first thing that we're going to do is linworks.net will send a request to add new user endpoint, a URL, with the email address with the Linworks unique ID to our code. In our code, we have to save this email address and unique Linworks ID and produce an authorization key, authorization token. So effectively, we create a profile and we create an authorization token and tell Linworks this is the authorization token for this integration. So now, from now on, linworks.net will be taking this authorization token and sending only that to our integration. By that, we can find out who this customer is, we can find its settings, all of this kind of stuff. So from the point after we basically call this add new user endpoint integration, the only thing we know about this integration is its authorization token, nothing else. No one doesn't know anything else about it. Okay, so the next step is to get a wizard stage, and we just call a user config endpoint. Can you actually see that on the screen? Okay. So we call user config endpoint to get the configuration stage. So this is where we actually going to have the description of the config stage. We're going to have all the config items and all this kind of stuff. So the user then enters all of the parameters of the configuration stage, click next, and then we take all of this data and send it back into our shipping courier integration into update config endpoint URL. That thing will validate all the entries and will respond with an error or not. And then this process can go back in a loop if there's a next stage in the wizard. So we go back, get the next stage, which will go up here in the user config endpoint. So we'll get what's the next stage. It will respond to the next stage. We'll repeat the same process again and again and again until the system responds with isConfig activated. Once the system responds with isConfig activated, gives a new stage name, and the stage name will be something like config. That means that that's it, it's ready. And we activate it in the user interface, and now the user can add the services and can actually use the integration. Then the user, once it's activated, we can add shipping services. Again, we use user available shipping services endpoint to get a list of services. And that's it. That's from our perspective as an external developer. All we need to do is just to tell user what his available services are. And Linworks.net will manage all of the other things, actually creating the web service, Linworks web service, mapping it, and all of this kind of stuff. It handles on its own. All we need to do is just say, this is the list of services that you can have. Then mapping extended properties is exactly the same. We just say what the extended properties that this courier expects. Just give me the list, and that's it. All we need to do is to produce that list, give it to the Linux.net, and manage all of this mapping by itself. The next thing is, of course, print and shipping label. And from print and shipping label, all we need to do really is to create this method called, well, create this code for actually generating a shipping label. So when a customer prints a shipping label, they go in the user interface, select an order, click shipping or print shipping label. Linux.net will find out what will find its Linux.net allocated shipping service. Will figure out the fact that it's actually for your custom courier integration. Will read the manifest. Will get the URL of this method, generate label endpoint, from the manifest, and compile the consignment request and send it into that URL. So our consignment request, where's the consignment request? Yeah, so this is available services. Yeah, generate label accepts a consignment request, which is a class effectively. Basically JSON that gets converted into a class, and this is its description. So it expects some, the address where you send it to, the packages, and some stuff within the package. All of this kind of stuff it will do by itself, and just send it to you. You need to process it in your external integration code. Okay, so and yeah, let's go back to that. I forgot to mention about a couple more endpoints. So we have cancel label. Again, we just send the order ID, the Linux.net. When a customer hits cancel label, again, we'll read what's the cancel label endpoint URL, then take the order ID that the customer wants to cancel, and just basically send it to that URL. And should you choose to process this request, to respond with an error saying you can't cancel this label, it's entirely up to you, or you just say, yeah, cancel. Again, it's entirely up to you how you handle this code, well, this process within the code itself. Create manifest. So again, once at the end of the day, the user has to file a manifest. So at this point, they just basically do exactly the same thing. They go and file, select the shipping courier integration. So they file a manifest, we'll read the manifest file, what's the URL, and send a request to that, and then basically print manifest. That's pretty much all the endpoints we need to create. Okay, so let's go ahead, and now that we've got, let's go to this. Okay, so in Linux.net, we can go and integrate Mark Direct. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into our setup controller right there. So this is what contains all our methods for setting customer up, well, customer integration up. And there's an add new user web method. I'm going to set a breakpoint there. The next method is user config. So this is something that retrieves the user config. Set a breakpoint there as well. And then this is a method that gets called when a customer filled in all the details on the configuration stage. Hit next. and we basically compile the request and send it to that endpoint. Then we have config delete, which is pretty simple. We just need to delete the actual profile file. I don't have two of them. That's wrong. Okay. Yeah, on user available services, we're going to get a list of services that the user can have. Extended properties, again, just going to set a breakpoint there. Okay, so I'm just going to set the breakpoint on pretty much every method that we're going to be looking at, just to see when and how it gets called. Okay, just going to start this up. I'm gonna fall. Wish the aircon was working. Okay, so let's go ahead and click Mars Direct Integration. Integrate. Give it a name. Some name. Yes, I do accept terms and conditions. Okay. So the very first thing that will happen, it will actually call this add new user method. Okay, so in here, what we need to do is we need to create an integration profile for the customer. So Linux.net will send in the request. So let's go and have a look at the request itself. The request is just a class that contains email, Linux unique identifier. So every single system in Linux is identified by a unique ID. And for example, if you're planning to charge for your application, you need this thing to know whether the customer is paying for the integration or not. And then account name is something that the user entered during the integration process, well, during the integration stage. Okay, so all we do is we're going to create a file, authorization config, right, that will contain all of this data. That will contain the authorization token that we generated ourselves, that we're going to tell Linworks this is the authorization token. And this is the properties effectively that we need for the integration. So in our case, in sample application, I'm just asking for contact address of the customer. But for example, in case of, let's say, NetDispatch, right, you will need their API details, right? So you will store them in there, in this configuration file. So you will ask those parameters in the wizard config, ask the customer to specify their API details, maybe some URLs, maybe some tick boxes or whatever NetDispatch requires you to have, and then you save them in this file. Okay. Okay, so we create this new authorization. We create this new profile for the customer, generate the authorization token, and effectively throw it back to Linux.net. One thing to remember is Linux.net has got 30-second expiration in every single call. So if it lasts for longer than 30 seconds, it's not going to work. So because I sat there within that method for longer than 30 seconds, the call has expired. Basically, the timeout has expired, so that's why nothing actually happened. Okay, but if I just let it go through straight away. All right. So this is the one that we're actually working with now. And as you can see, it's created a new integration, but it's an input required stage. So basically, when the customer proceeds to the next stage of the wizard, Linux.net will call getUserConfig method. In this method, basically all we're going to be sending is a base request that just contains the authorization token, nothing else. Okay. We're going to load the class, the authorization config of this user by this authorization token. Okay, and we know who this customer is. So we know it's this email address, blah, blah, blah. This is when they were integrated. And most importantly, we have the current config status of this integration. So this config status is at which stage of the integration this custom configuration is at. Okay, and in the sample code itself, all we're doing is basically, as I said, we're just creating pretty much three stages of the configuration and one final stage of the actual, this is your ready config, and outputting the settings that the customer has got. So the very first thing we just check in, is this config actually active, or we still in the integration stages? And if we are, then we're just gonna check if the config status is contact stage, then we return a class that represents this config stage, this contact stage. And just really hard-coded this. It's just a class that effectively has got wizard description, wizard title, and then the config items that we're asking the customer to enter. Each config item contains things like a name, description, group name, things like that, and the value type, which can be string, boolean, int, or a list. And so, for example, when it's a list, then the user will be able to see a drop-down box, which they can select stuff from. Okay, so effectively, when the user requests user config stage, we load in his profile, user's profile by authorization token. We'll look at the current config status. This is the stage. Load this config stage from the definition of what the stage should be. If you've got, if you're managing his, if the workflow for the configuration going backwards and forwards and saving all the values in different places, you would normally save all the property, all the settings that the customer has specified in this stage. You would save into this authorization config class, and you save it on the disk basically. And every time you load this class, it will load all those settings. Okay, so go ahead. Go back again. All right, so the customer can now basically enter all of this stuff. So let's go ahead and modify this form a little bit. So let's go and add a new property into this configuration stage, just to see how it's done. We go and stop this, and basically, again, let's just walk through this code again. We'll load the authorization config. This is the profile for the customer. Check if it's an active config or we're still in the wizard stage. Then we check, if it's not, then we proceed to actually retrieving what configuration stage this customer has got. So in our case, it's config stage, contact stage. In the contact stage, we just return this set of config items that they have to enter. And what I'm going to do is in here, just after the telephone, for example, okay, I'm going to add a new property, new setting, a new config item, whatever you want to call it. Just a question. Give it config item an ID, and this is the ID that Linux.net will send back to you once the customer has entered the value. All they're going to send, or all Linux.net will send, is this config ID and the selected value. So in here we can actually specify a default value. So let's just say a question is, are you a good person? Some description in a tooltip. Okay. We say that this value must be specified. So for example, when it's a string or a double, for example, if it's false, the customer can just leave it blank. Where it must be specified, it must be specified. Then in here by default, we're gonna say true. So, and the value type will be Boolean. Okay. Sorry? The group name is how it basically groups them up. Basically, at the moment, as you can see, all the customer contact information is grouped under sender address, And this last stage, this one, next stage config, let's just have a look at what it looks like on the user interface separately. Okay? And once it's built, we can actually run it. All right. Yeah, if I click config, we're just hitting this point again. Let's just go. Good. Yeah. This is the group name, right? And it just groups up all of those values under this group name. And next config stage is the next group. Okay. As you can see, added are you a good person? And they also automatically tick it as true. And we've got two blocks here. Yeah. Let's go ahead and actually fill this stuff in.
Question. You need to fill that in within 30 seconds.
No. It's only because I actually set a breakpoint there. Okay. So Linux.net started executing this web call and didn't get a response back in 30 seconds. So it just went, well, screw it. It's basically every single call to external source has got a 30-second expiration. So for example, when you generate a shipping label, you haven't managed to generate a shipping label within 30 seconds. Linux.net will abandon the whole thing. So the user will never even see these labels, right? And you might have generated them. Yeah? And as you generated them, you might have actually charged the customer. For example, if it's something like a paper print courier service, if you've generated those labels, then you try to communicate back to Linux, but this 30-second timeout has expired. So the user will never see those labels. So they will try to print them again. So they will get double charged, basically. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So in your system, for example, in your external application, you have to account for this kind of stuff. It might happen that you actually will, the data will expire. So effectively, if you've got an integration that that might actually expire within 30 seconds, I mean the label might not come through in the 30 seconds. Because Linux.net will save this label anyway when it gets it. So even if the customer hit print shipping label, then close the browser. If basically Linux.net can talk to your integration, then got the label back, it will save it, right? When the customer comes back to the browser and try to print it again, we'll give them that label. But if the communication broke between Linux.net and your system, then we won't know about this label. So the customer would try to print it again and you would effectively double bill them. If you don't have any mechanisms for making sure that you're retrieving the label instead of printing a new one.
So labels from this integration would be saved the same way as we save the ones we directly integrate with. So they would be saved the same way as Royal Mail's labels for reprinting.
Yeah. They're going to be exactly the same labels, basically. So it saves the whole image, basically, for a label. So every time you reprint a label, it doesn't send the request again. Okay, where was I?
What if they change the data on the order?
Sorry?
What if they change the data on the order?
No, it's basically, it validates. So for example, if they changed anything on the order, before it gives them a label, it validates and will say, oh, the order has changed, I'm not going to give you the label anymore. So then I can show that, basically. Okay, let's fill this, this form in. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go and set a breakpoint in update config stage endpoint, right? So we hit next. Don't be alarmed. Every time we follow this wizard, we call Linux.net will call user config basically twice. So first time it will go and get all the values, and then it will go and get all the default values and everything that needs to be sort of validated. So this method will get called twice before the update config will get called. So it's absolutely normal. Okay, let's just skip that. See, hits that again. And then it calls update config. So in the update config, what it's going to send is this request here. Let's just have a look at this request. Okay, again, authorization token with pretty much every request. It sends all the config items, right, that the customer has entered, and as you can see, it only sends config item ID and selected value and nothing else. Okay, and from our code perspective, we just go in, and this is quite an important thing. So that, I recommend, you can actually omit this. You can just delete this bit out of your code if you really want to, but I really recommend to keep this in. So what this does, it verifies that the config stage that we know this customer is at, right, locally, corresponds to what Linux.net knows. Right? So this is to avoid two customers entering the same information at the same time. One of them will hit first and will change the config stage, and the other one will override the first one. Right? So this is an important one, and just for a sanity check, well, the fact that everything is working correctly. So your config stage must be the same as the config stage that Linux.net is sending back. So first of all, you remember in this case, it got the user config, and it returned the current state of the config, and it was complex stage. So Linux.net remembered it, then user entered all the values, and then it will send in the request. This is the config status, well, config stage that I'm sending the values for. And if it differs to what you actually know this config locally, then there's something went wrong. So I recommend to leave this code in place and throw an error message if something is wrong. The next thing is we kind of need to know what values are we going to be expecting from the Linux.net and where to save them. So effectively, at this stage, we just check if the config status is this, right? So in this case, we know that we're going to be getting name, address, city, all of these values, and effectively, we're just going to go and save them locally in our integration profile for the specific authorization token. The next one is where we can actually control the workflow of the wizard. So based on some values, we can direct the wizard, what next stage of this wizard will be. So in our case, we just check what value the customer has chosen in that drop-down box, whether it's value stage or description stage, and effectively assign the relevant config status to it. So the customer and the user, in our case, selected, I want the next stage to be a config status, or not config status, value stage, to enter all the values. So we just switch the config status to the value stages. Okay, and finally, we save this profile on a disk, right? Let's just make sure we actually have the breakpoint and user config. All right, so if I launch this, probably because, again, the timeout has expired, so it didn't do anything. I'm going to hit that again. User config update. Okay, it's already loaded the next stage, which is a value stage. Let's set a breakpoint back into update config. And basically the next stage in our config will be this one, value stage. Okay. So let's hit next. Oh yes. That has to have a value of true or false because the default value was set to nothing. So Linux.net expects this value to be something, true or false. Basically, it's just a validation, internal Linux.net validation method. Just to basically explain what that error was, for example. It's already hit that. Okay. Never mind. Basically, we've hit this config status value stage. So we know that the customer has entered some of the parameters of that stage. And we go forward, and basically what we're going to do is we're going to evaluate one of the values that they've entered. So I'm asking them to put some int value at one point, and effectively I'm just going to cast this int value because everything is coming in as a string. We don't have any strong type communication, just everything comes as a string. And evaluate whether they actually entered the value correctly. And I would recommend to validate everything that Linux.net sends. So if you're expecting the address to be there in the request parameters, make sure it's actually in the list first. If it's not, throw an error. Don't expect Linux.net just basically to send out one. Don't expect the config to send everything through. Just for your own sanity in the code, make sure that if you save in, like for example, what I'm doing here is I'm just saying request config item, find this item, and just take its value. What if the request config items, and Alex, this is bloody for you, you know, it should be bloody tattooed on your forehead. Don't expect this element to be in the list. Always check that it is in the list. This is kind of a wrong thing to do, but you know, simply it's a demo application, so it's fine. Okay, but anyway, I'm going to cast this into int, and I'm going to check if it's less than 10. I'm going to throw an error message. And again, as you can see, operation timeout out. Fine. Let's throw that again. All right.
What is the description stage?
Description stage. Say anything you want, really.
Because you can only choose one or the other, right?
Yeah, it's just a workflow control. So you're asking the user what, you know, this is a demo app, basically. It doesn't mean that it has to be like this, right? Those stages could be anything you want. You can ask you can put a picture of a cat and say, this is a lion, for example. And if they say yes or no, you take them to a form to check are they retarded or not before, this kind of stuff. So it's entirely up to you how you control the stage. A description stage is just a name for a stage. Okay, as you can see, for example, I'm just going to leave 1 in there. Okay, we're going to validate, let's do it within 30 seconds. We're going to validate the fact that it's less than 10 and throw an error, effectively. So within this response, we just throw an error message. And this error message would be displayed on the user interface. So it's not going to allow them to proceed to the next stage until everything is correct, okay? Okay, we're going to go through the next stage. All right, so this is for Breaky. So at the moment we are on config status value stage. We validate it's all fine. Then the next stage, we're saying that the next stage of our configuration would be description stage. Okay, let's set a breakpoint there. All right. So the next thing the Linux.net does, it will call get me user config again. And now that we, in the previous method, in the update stage, we changed this configuration stage to a description stage. Okay. And now our our integration profile has got config status as description stage. So we know we need to load this description stage. And this description stage is something that I've just defined myself. I just said it'll have a description of some sort, some title, and some config items. Yeah. So yeah, at this stage, we just basically presenting some data to the customer. The customer, we can have links. That was the whole purpose of this specific config stage. Well, of this specific wizard step, so that you can demonstrate the fact that you can have links generated on the form as well. So, for example, if you've got some weird scenario where you have to take the user through an integration, then generate some shipping labels for them to get verified, all this kind of stuff. So effectively, you can then generate a link for them to go to some kind of website. In my case, you can see that I've generated gmail.com token, and then I can insert a token in there. So I can divert them to go to external website and say, go to that external website, print the labels, give them to your account manager so that they can verify that your printer works correctly. that's the whole purpose of this specific, demo stage. Again, we can have some values, and we can check whether they've entered those values and so on. Okay, so in the final stage, that's it, done. And I haven't actually shown you what it actually did on the final stage. Update config. Let me just walk you through it. But anyway, so on the very final stage, on that description stage, when we update the config, we will check if the config status was description stage. Then we're going to set the configuration stage to if config active to true, and just give it a config status config and save the model. That's it. Okay. So let's go back into these. Okay, now we can see that we've got the Mars Direct integration is complete. And then when we click config, exactly the same thing will happen. It will get user config, it will call user config endpoint. The request will be just our authorization key. We will load its profile file, evaluate is config active, and it is true. So we're not going to go through the wizard configuration anymore. We're just going to go straight to retrieving the user config details, get user config stage, which is the actual config details of the customer. And into that, we'll also provide the actual config of the customer, because he entered the address, the account name, all this kind of stuff. So when we generate in this stage, in the config items.self, we define what config items we will display on that screen. And in the selected values, we actually put the values that the customer entered. Do you get it? Yeah? And in here, we can also control what's going to be read-only, what's going to be displayed. I can change this, for example. Let's set the breakpoint there. I can change this and say, no, I can't say anything because it's a local host. Debugging, so I can't make any line code changes, but I can change this selected value that I've entered to say UR and then their account name, something like that, right? And this is for the purpose of actually displaying this. It's like the very final stage of every single integration. It's a configuration stage that is in ready mode, basically. And it also has got some config items that the customer can change. Okay. That's it. Should we take a break? I need a break.